presentation I'm doing was written some years ago by Jerry Turnquist. I do not want to take anything away from Jerry. I'm just presenting. I made a few tweaks, but this is 99% Jerry's work from, so that means you know it's good. So shall we get going? All right, Jerry and I would like to dedicate the program to the drivers, mechanics, and the pitmen who took part in the Elgin road races. Their skill and courage thrilled crowds and helped contribute to the development of the modern automobile. Racing has always helped the modern automobile. Things that are developed for race cars find their way into our stock cars. The races were held from 1910 to 1915. They took a break for World War I. And again, they came back and raced in 1919 and 1920, and we'll learn a little bit about why they revived it in 1933. The road race was an 8.5-mile course on rural roads west of Elgin. We'll look at that in a future slide. We'll cover the area. But first, let's talk about some early reports of automobiles in the Elgin area. In 1899, a horseless vehicle en route from Evanston to Rockford stopped in Elgin. Two men drivers, they had dinner, bought some gasoline. They were on their way. The pair said they were averaging 15 miles an hour. I think that's pretty outstanding for 1899. By 1903, 23 Elgin car owners banded together to form the Elgin Automobile Association. And their stated purpose was to work for the passage of speed limits, drive well-lighted machines at night, and have fun drives into the country as a social activity. In 1907, a race came through Elgin. 30 vehicles sped through Elgin on a round-trip race between Chicago and Rockford. The pack was led by Elginite Frank Wood. You'll meet him at the cemetery, driving an Apperson Jackrabbit. He made the trip from Chicago to Elgin in 1 hour and 20 minutes. Now, as a salesman, I've made that trip many times. An hour and 20 minutes is about right. So nothing has improved. The papers in 1907 reported that Elginites were buying mostly Buicks and Fords. 4-cylinder engines were popular, and your best colors were dark blue, green, wine red, and bright red. 1912, we had a gasoline controversy. The prices of gas raised 4 cents during the summer, and this had Elgin residents upset. Can you imagine paying 19 cents a gallon for regular gas, or 22 cents for Pennsylvania grade gas? Well, based on 1912 salary, perhaps that was right. Alice Bird Potter is another person you'll meet at the cemetery walk this year. She was one of the first women in Elgin to own and maintain and operate her own vehicle. And in 1908, she made national news when she drove her car from Elgin to New York and back. And she drove it alone. She wanted no men with her. From time to time, women would jump in and ride with her for a stretch during the route. And she reported the only trouble she had was she had to change one flat tire. So a predecessor to the Elgin Road Race was run in Crown Point, Indiana in 1909. The race was held in June, and the Crown Point race seemed to have a lot going for it. It was promoted by the Chicago Motor Club. And there was, in fact, two races to be held, one for heavy cars and one for light cars. And the Colby Cup for the heavy cars was won by a man named Louis Chevrolet. You may have encountered that name. He was a lowly Buick mechanic at the time, but he would go on to bigger and better things. But the Crown Point race had some problems. Mostly, there was only one paying ticket holder. So the grandstand was empty. As you can imagine, whoops, I got ahead of myself. It was a financial disaster. So Crown Point was one and done. But Frank Wood, the man who was racing through Elgin earlier, Frank Wood thought maybe Elgin would be the place to host a road race. And so he was a local car dealer and a racer, and he got people interested in organizing a race for Elgin, and he proposed an 8.5-mile course on rural roads west of Elgin. He pointed out that Elgin had advantages. There was no steep hills to encounter, no railroad tracks to cross, no crossroads would be in the way, and no population center to pass through. And further, he thought maybe we could, it'd be good for ticket sales. We were close to Chicago. Elgin was served by an excellent streetcar and railroad system to get people here. And he even pointed out that we had a National Guard detachment in Elgin who could provide security for the races. So you're going to have to raise some money. So in 1910, the Elgin Automobile Road Race Association was formed, and $20,000 in capital stock was raised. This happens to be a stock certificate there that's in our collection. It is for a $50 increment. You could buy a piece of the road race and hopefully make a little bit of money. So where did we race? I guess you can see that pretty well, right? Now here, I'll step out here. So this is Larkin Avenue right here. And the start, stop, finish was right here, pretty much just behind where Larkin High School is now. Larkin High School sits right here. This is actually on this map. It's called the Hornbeak Farm. And I will talk, I won't mention Larkin High School anymore. I'll talk about the Hornbeak Farm. Okay, so we know where it's at. So start, finish was here. We ran east, north on McLean. We would go out Highland Avenue, that's at North Leg. And towards the top at the back here, that's Aviation Hill, or known as the hump. And when cars went over the hump, they would go airborne. And we have some pictures of that in the show. The west leg is Coombs Road, and the south leg then is Larkin Avenue, Route 20. This is Graveyard Bend right here. That's where Coombs meets 20. So named because there's a graveyard there. It was also the most dangerous corner on the race, according to reports. It was thought, in my thinking, it might have been dangerous because it was not a hard right turn. It looked a little soft. I wonder if some of the racers thought they might go faster than they could. You know, they had to slow down for the hairpin corner up at the top left. In fact, that hairpin corner was softened a few years later in the race. You can see where they drew a little softer turn there. That came later. Randall Road is penciled in here, but Randall Road did not exist at the time. So there was no crossroads. So you come back into town and you pass the grandstand and you're back to the Hornbeak Farm and the start stop. Britain's Hill right here was a spot where they would get some high speeds. And of course they would get high speeds on that backstretch too. We clear on the route? You can still drive that route today. Well, if you're going to have a race, you have to offer some prizes. So the first prize was $1,000, and second and third place prizes, you can see $300 and $200. And you have to have a trophy, although the trophy you see there is not the trophy for the big race. There was actually on race weekend, there was several races held on Friday with the big race held on Saturday. The big race was called the Elgin National. The lesser races were shorter. They might be for lighter weight cars, different classifications. But the trophy you see is the trophy we have in our collection, and it's back in the corner there. It was a trophy for one of the lesser races. And we acquired that a few years ago when a number of our members ponied up some money and won a eBay auction. That Charles Mers was the man who won that trophy, and his descendants were offering off the trophy and the goggles and the helmet. I say helmet, the leather cap that you see back there were Charles Mers's. And we got lots of pictures, but most importantly, we got a trophy. Now, the real trophy is the Elgin National Trophy, and that's a picture of it. It stands about this high. It is made of 40 pounds of silver and stands 40 inches tall. 40 pounds of silver is around $18,000 a day if you were just buying it for the sake of the silver. It was purchased and donated by the Elgin National Watch Company, and it was to be awarded to the first place driver. Now, you only got to keep it for the year. It's kind of like the Stanley Cup in hockey. You can have it for the year. You have to bring it back next year and give it to the next winner. All right, now we're getting close now for our first race in 1910. So with less than 2 months to go, we got to get the track ready. Everyone pitched in. Now, you guys think that that's a paved route, just like it is today, right? Wrong. Those were crummy dirt and gravel roads, narrow, unsafe, and rutted. But we're going to race on them. So everybody has to come out and bring their horses and their hand scrapers and level and pack and fill in the potholes and and work on the road. I love this picture. Notice the men are wearing, some of them are wearing ties, and they have their hats on, and they're out doing road work. Part of the road work was to put down 50,000 gallons of oil. Now, why would they do that? Keep down the dust. So 50,000 gallons of oil. And of course, if we're all going to work on an important project, we need to take a group photo, right? So here we are taking our photo. Now, when entry blanks were distributed to the automobile makers, they responded, and so did the top drivers. So Barney Oldfield, Ralph Mulford, Dave Buck, Harry Grant, Al Livingstone, and others would race here. And these were the biggest names in racing at the time. Barney Oldfield, you've probably heard of, right? Probably the most famous racer from the time. The first man to drive an automobile 60 miles an hour. And when he climbed out of the car, he told his associates, people will never drive 60 miles an hour. It takes your breath away. Of course, considering the car he was driving, so as race day approaches, the drivers would set up camps around the course, taking over the sheds and barns and the corn cribs on the farmer's property. Now, this is a good time to talk about who didn't like road racing in Elgin. The farmers. It upset their daily schedule. It certainly upset their animals, and they really wanted no part of this circus going by their farms. So the organizers came up with a couple of ideas to sell the concept to the farmers. One, why don't you rent your barns out to the various racing teams, because they're going to be here all week practice racing ahead of the big races. You make some money that way. And, you know, if you invite people onto your farm to watch the race from your property, we'll share the ticket price with you. And if you and your wife are industrious in the kitchen, these people are going to need to buy snacks. You could make some money running the concessions. So they kind of got the buy-in from the farmers that way, but I'll tell you, they were never particularly happy. So the first race involves a lot of car names you've never heard of before. National, Lazier, Simplex, Knox, Marmon, Black Crow, Jackson, they all raced, but 2 Model Ts showed up and did not race. The organizers decided that they were not within the specifications that were required. So Henry Ford's Ts had to watch the race. Now, one of the rules was the cars had to be stock cars, not like the stock cars we see today. Could you imagine going into a dealership and trying to buy a stock car today like you see racing NASCAR? Wouldn't happen. These had to be the actual cars. The modifications they allowed was they could take off the fenders, they could take off the headlights, and they could take off the windshields. But other than that, it had to be the same car that was on the showroom floor. And that, of course, offered marketing gains. You know, the manufacturer could say that car that won the Elgin Road Race, you too could own one just like it. Just go see your dealer. All right, we're getting close. Ticket orders came in from Texas and Canada, faraway places. The city decked itself out with flags and bunting. At race time approach, the track was closed 1 hour beforehand, and the National Guard showed up. They were placed along the track to maintain order and keep people from crossing the roadway. But before we start, let's take a little look around the track. Here's the west leg. This is Coombs Road, looking down from Edina towards Route 20. Not much, is it? Here's Larkin Avenue. There's Graveyard Bend, where Coombs meets 20. Got to build a grandstand. Some people are going to buy seats and sit in the grandstand. Other people are going to spread out around the track. And here's what a typical car would look like. Now, here's Ed Crane and his mechanic, Earl Asher. Yes, 2 men would drive on the car when they raced. The drivers wore only goggles. Yes, there's no roll bars, no airbags, no seat belts, no hard helmets. As you can see later on, a crash had oftentimes an unhappy ending. I left a lot of the pictures in here of cars because I give this talk in front of old car groups, and this is what they focus on. but here's Billy Endicott and H.J. Edwards in a Cole. Again, notice no fenders, no headlights, no windshield. So why two men in a car? Well, who wouldn't want to drive around with their very own mechanic with them at all times? That sound good? The mechanic could jump out and do simple repairs. He could change a tire. He was watching the gauges and pumping oil. Spare tires and flat tires were common, but he also had another job. It says he had to look out for other race cars. One of these things these cars don't have is rear view mirrors. So the mechanic was the rear view mirror. He spent most of his time looking behind the car. The rules of the race were, if a faster car was gaining, the driver ahead had to move over to the right and let the faster car pass. So it was the mechanic's job to keep the driver apprised of that. There's J.A. Heineman and his Marmon. There's A.M. Miller and a war in Detroit at the starting line. Those cars don't look like much, do they? W.H. Pierce and Frank O'Brien in a fail car. Barney Oldfield was probably the most famous racer of the time. He raced several times in Elgin. He was never successful in Elgin. He suffered breakdowns. So there's a look at the 1910 start-finish line. The banner says start-finish, and the building, if you will, the stands on the right, that's the official timekeeper stand, and for the judges. Pits were kind of to the and off to the left in the back of this picture. Now the race was run in a confusing way. Because the roads were narrow, they couldn't have a big all-encompassing start. So the cars were lined up 2 by 2 in pairs. And every 30 seconds, they would start a pair of cars. And then the next 2 cars would line up, and then they would take off. So consequently, you had no idea who was winning the race, but that's why there was a big giant chalkboard, which we've tried to recreate there in the back, a big giant chalkboard where they kept the laps and the time and the car numbers on there. So that was constantly being updated, and it was visible from the grandstand if you were lucky enough to be able to see it. Now, just to add to the confusion, sometimes we run more than one race at one time. So remember, there was different length races, and there was races for different classes of cars. So if this, particularly on Friday when they were having several different races, they'd get all the cars for one race to start, and then they'd start the group that's the other race and try and get them all on the track, before they start making the first lap. And so again, it was chaos, but what were you there to see? Cars going by real fast. And so that wasn't interrupted. Just like horse racing, the drivers were color-coded. All the drivers wore khaki pants, but their jerseys generally indicated what cars they were driving. So the national men wore blue jerseys with white stripes. The Marmon men wore yellow and black. Kessel car drivers wore red and white. So if you had a favorite car, that helped you identify the car. And somebody might get hurt, so these modern ambulances are ready to go. And true to the word, the National Guard brought their truck out, and they stationed themselves around the track. We all know where the Larkin home was, right? Just on Larkin Avenue, just a couple blocks east of the Hornbeak turn. Well, you need concessions, so the Larkin home students mingled in the crowd selling chewing gum to raise money for the Larkin home. Of course, you have to have some controversy. This was a letter to the editor of the Elgin paper complaining that Mr. Britton had procured a government license and proposes to sell beer at his place on the race course, west of the city on the Major Sherman farm, and the writer thought that should not be allowed. Now, this is pre-prohibition nationally, but by Jeff White, by 1910, did we have prohibition in Elgin? 14? So it was even pre that then, right? Yeah, okay. Well, I guess it would have been legal then. So here's a newsboy arrested. I know you can't read that, but this interesting little story, I'll read it for you. Jay Jacobs, Chicago newsboy, was arrested just after 7 o'clock at Fountain Square this morning by Officer Ron. He was engaged in an altercation with a patron over change from a $5 bill. The case was dismissed by Police Magistrate Thompson after Jacobs' sister pleaded on his behalf. She declared that their father had died recently, and the boy was now the sole support of the family, having come to Elgin during the races to earn some money. Isn't that interesting? So this was after the race. The paper ran an article about, were the concessions better on the infield or the outfield? I didn't know that was a concern. So here's an action picture of Ray Haroon going around Hornbeak Turn, again, right where Larkin High School is now. And just like today, the cars would break down. So 1910 had broken frame, broken wheel, broken steering knuckle, a radiator leak, a twisted clutch, broken connecting rods. It was hard to finish a 300-mile race. I probably neglected to tell you that. 36 laps on that course, 300 miles basically. So it was a 300-mile race. Smiling Ralph Mulford did win the 1910 race. And here's a better picture of Smiling Ralph. He's the one on the left, smiling. And his mechanic. Ralph averaged 62.5 miles an hour on those lousy roads for the 305-mile race. He stopped once for gas, water, and oil. Now you'll find as the years go on, the average speeds get faster. And once again, there's Smiling Ralph. He's pretty happy about the 1910 winning of the big race, the national race. So we roll into 1911. Right away, we have a controversy. I wish I knew more about this story. Permission to use the rural roads for the track was delayed by a woman who said she never got her complimentary tickets the year before. I don't know the backstory. Apparently, they got her situated. So now there's just a signboard. This is advertising the races. They were always held on a Friday and a Saturday late in August. And all that small print talks about all the different prices you could buy a ticket for, as low as 50 cents or as much as $15 if you bought a box seating 6. Some tickets, let you stand along the racetrack. Some let you get into the grandstand. Some let you bring your car up to next to the racetrack and sit in your car and watch. This promo piece is a cartoon advertising the race. The race cars flying by. The man on the split rail fence is saying, "Let her spin," and his daughter's next to him going, "My." And the boy on the fence is going, "Gee." But I think the real story here is the pig in front. This is no place for me, says the pig. This is no place for me. So there's a good look at how they would start the races. That's the 2x2. Yes.
How many entrants would there be, and how often was the winner and second and third decided by whose car lasted?
I can't answer either of those questions, although later in the show, I do have some of those numbers, but as a rule, I don't know what it was and how accurate could those guys with stopwatches be? It begs that question, doesn't it? So the photographers must have liked Hornbeak Turn, because all the pictures are cars going around Hornbeak. So that's Don Hare in his national, making the turn from Larkin on to McLean. And the paper wanted you to know that in 1911, the roads were better this year. And to the extent that you can see that picture out of the paper, that looks a little bit better. So you build a grandstand. Does anybody know where the grandstand was? Anybody have an idea about Grandstand Place? Did the light bulb just come on? Why Grandstand Place is named as it is? That's right. It's mostly doctor's offices there now, but that's where the grandstand was. And so there it's being built. Look at those ladies in the front with their long dresses on, and they've got their hats. They're here dressed to kill for the day. Here's a wide angle lens picture looking up at the grandstand. It's packed. So after the first lap, the cars are all gone and they're coming around to close out the first lap. Someone yells, "Car coming," and everybody in the grandstand stood up, and what do you suppose happened? It collapsed. About 600 people dropped to the ground, 40 required medical attention. Most just sustained broken bones. No word whether they got their money back or not. But so they were able to see one lap of the race. Now there's a look at the hairpin turn, and you can see in that upper right-hand corner, there is some bleachers there. So that would have been a popular spot perhaps to watch the car slow and make that turn. So the 1911 race was marred by a terrible accident when Dave Buck and his mechanic Sam Jacobs were killed in a rollover accident caused by a flat tire. And again, there was no safety equipment whatsoever. When you look at the road race display in the back, we have the track laid out there, and there's little crosses where the deadly accidents happened. 5 men in all would die racing in Elgin. 2 each in 2 crashes, and the 5th man died when he was in the car alone on a practice lap. So 1911 race is won by Len Zengel, driving 66 miles an hour. So he's bumped it up a few. We roll into 1912. Now this is a big deal. Elgin's getting known across the country as the place to race. And so here again is a advertising piece, August 30, 31 this year. It's now the greatest race in the country's history. It says so right there. Now we're attracting celebrities. Who knows who Jack Johnson is? Heavyweight champion of the world. The first black heavyweight champion of the world. He comes to Elgin. He loved expensive cars. He loved racing. He came to watch the races, but he tried to get Barney Oldfield to race him even up on a challenge race, and Barney Oldfield wouldn't do it. In fact, they quickly threw up speed limit signs so that there'd be no racing unless it was, sanctioned. So we start seeing some more upgrades. A chain-driven Fiat was here. First time a chain-driven car is racing. There's another look at the start-finish line. Ralph Mulford's in the #1 car. George Clark is in a Mercedes, #2 car. And here's Ralph De Palma airborne, going over the hump on Aviator Hill. All 4 wheels off the road. Now, in 1912, this Mercedes was out in front until the 6th lap when his accident occurred. Looks kind of gruesome. The driver walked away. So if racing cars is a good idea, no, I got ahead of myself. I'm sorry. Graveyard Bend. This is just a picture of a car coming around the Graveyard Bend at Udina. Notice the gentleman in the lower left-hand corner. He's got a flag in his hand. I guess he's telling the drivers they have to turn. Whoops, let's go back up. Eddie Rickenbacker raced in Elgin. Who knows Eddie Rickenbacker? Marge?
Ace.
World War I flying ace. He shot down a lot of German airplanes. Yep. Well, of that era. And what? Did he for a while? Yeah. So Rickenbacker, like Oldfield, never had much success in Elgin, but he raced. This time he managed 7 laps before dropping out. But apparently this man lived a daredevil life. If racing cars wasn't tough enough, by World War I, he's flying airplanes and shooting down German planes. So if we're going to have races, we're going to have programs, and programs have to have ads. So the Trieber brothers want you to know that they're the place in Elgin to buy Excelsior and Indian motorcycles. And Fred Freich wants you to know that you can buy any upholstery item you need for your car. Slip covers, dust covers, automobile tops, and he'll make to order a trunk for your car. So more newspaper stories. The one on the right talks about pickpockets being active at the race. And when I'm going through the newspapers of this era, pickpockets are a big thing in this time period. And they're apparently out working the road race. I'm going to read this article on the left because I know you can't. But this, I think, is a fun little story. The headline is "Boy Holds Racer's Tire." It was only a minor incident in connection with yesterday's race, but it made one boy happy and gave him something to remember for life. Bounding down Britain's Hill, Joe Dawson's Delta threw a tire early in the race. It rolled parallel to the machine for a short distance and then veered into the ditch. As the tire toppled over, a boy sprang over the fence and sat on it. Dawson never hesitated, but drove to his car to the pits where the missing part was replaced. Efforts of the militiamen to take the tire away from the youth were of no avail. He hugged it closely. And when Dawson came around on his next lap, he slowed down and the boy handed the mechanic the tire. The crowd cheered. Don't you love that? So the 1912 race is won by Ralph De Palma, and he had an average speed of 68 miles an hour in a Mercedes. So we raced into 1913, and here's a little marketing piece. This is an ad for free parking space to Buick owners, paid for by McBride Brothers. By the way, David McBride is another person who's going to be talked about the cemetery walk. But McBride Brothers Buick would give you a free spot on a farm to watch the race as long as you drove your Buick in, and you could party with other Buick owners. He would refund you the $2 price you paid to bring the car in. And only Buicks. Another ad, this is a RCH is an automobile manufacturer that no one's ever heard of, right? We've heard of Hupmobiles. Well, when Mr. Hupp sold his company, he started a new one, and he used his initials, RCH. Apparently, the RCH company didn't last long, maybe because you could buy a car for $750. I don't know. Ziegler Brothers wants you to know that they're the place for Goodyear tires. So here we've started the 1913 race, another action photo. For the first time, we see wire wheels. What were the spokes made of before? Wood spokes. But now we have wire wheels. So if we're going to race cars, we might as well race motorcycles too. So this was a motorcycle race held on July 4th in 1913. That must not have worked out because we only raced motorcycles one year in Elgin. Eddie Rickenbacker's back. And Gil Anderson would win in a Stutz. And the average speed was 73 miles an hour now on these crummy roads. Yeah. Yeah, in a tin can. So we roll into 1914. Elgin's all decked out downtown for race day. And we're lining up again 2x2s for the 1914 race. And to answer your question, in this race, 20 cars started, but only 8 finished. So there's a sampling. And there's more controversy. Rob Motorcamp after midnight, big loot denied. This story is complicated, and some newsboys were accused of breaking into one of the barns and stealing auto parts, and but then they weren't, and then they were, and it's hard to say who was true, but this suggests that a $400 theft happened. But again, the report says it's untrue. Crowd records are shattered. 100,000 are here. Well, we don't think that's true. The best we in the museum can cobble together is a typical race weekend attracted about 50,000 people. Now, Elgin's a town of 25,000 at the time. So having 50,000 people coming here was a big deal. 100,000 might have been a little more deal than it was. So here's Ralph De Palma in his Mercedes. And of course, De Palma, more controversy. You know, he wins the year before. He was late returning the trophy, and he almost forfeited his $5,000 bond. Again, I wish I knew more of the backstory on that, but it got straightened out. So here, this is just kind of a picture of the race in progress. The dust you see being kicked up in the background is the race car. The cars you see in the foreground are spectators' cars, people sitting in the seats watching. So Spencer Wishart was killed and his mechanic when his car clipped another and hit a tree. And that's, I'm sorry, I went the wrong way on that, didn't I? So there's the wrecked car. I want to read a little quote from Mike Alf's book. The most spectacular fatal crash occurred in 1914 when Spencer Wishart's big Mercer grazed the hubcap of the car he was overtaking, shot crazily through the air above a row of spectators, and slammed into a tree. The car struck one bystander, hurling him to the ground and leaving a tire mark on his shirt, but no broken bones. Neither the driver nor the mechanic, Jack Genter, survived. Just another picture of another car here. Frontenac Speedster in 1914. Eddie Rickenbacker's back into Duesenberg. Broken gear shift lever, put him out of the race early. Again, not much success here. Not everybody was a fan of racing. Here's a clergyman quoted in the paper that the races were more cruel than the brutal bullfights of Spain. No better in spirit than the gladiatorial contests of the early centuries in the arena of the Roman Colosseum. That was right after one of those crashes, one of those deadly crashes. So Ralph De Palma, who wasn't going to return the trophy, wins again in a Mercedes-Benz. So maybe he knew he should just hang on to the trophy. 74 miles an hour. The race is not 305 miles, it's 301. And the difference is because now they've taken the sharpness off that hairpin turn. And the paper says Elgin seems to like the name Ralph. Ralph Mulford having won the first race, Ralph De Palma having won two, he would win a third one. So apparently you had a leg up if your name was Ralph. So we roll into 1915. That race was won by Gil Anderson in a Stutz. His average speed was 7 miles an hour. Again, constantly growing it. Now we're into 1919. You saw the break we took, for the war, right? We didn't race in 16, 17. So 19 and 18. So 1919 now we're back to racing. It's the 7th race. It's the first one since 1915. It was also the first race since the war ended. 14 cars entered, but 2 withdrew because of lack of parts due to the war. Well, we call that supply chain issues now, right? So of the cars that were entered, 5 Duesenbergs, 2 were 8 cylinders, 3 were 4 cylinders. Most of the engines had a displacement of about 290 cubic inches. But we have to have some controversy also. $500 reward. We will pay a reward of $500 for the arrest and conviction of the person or persons who put nails and tacks on the Elgin Road Race course Friday night or Saturday morning. Ralph Mulford, who won the first race, he led the pack, but he had to withdraw because of engine problems. Tommy Milton would win the race, averaging 73.9. This is the only time the average speed dropped from the prior year, and the first one back after the war. But he still picked up a $4,000 prize. So 1920 would be the last of the main generation of the races. More technology, the introduction of front wheel brakes let drivers approach corners at a higher rate of speed. Of course they could, because they could slam on the brakes, get four tires, 4 wheels braking, not just 2, let them approach the corners faster. At Graveyard Bend, De Palma overran the corner and went into a ravine. He drove onto the cow's path and came back onto the track, but let me read a little more detail. Again, well, this is Eddie Rickenbacker. Maybe I'm a little ahead of myself, but I'll read this anyway. The perils faced by the racers were described by Eddie Rickenbacker, who was bumped by a car he was passing. I hit the ditch, just as poor Spence did, the man who died. And just as poor Spence had done minutes before. I went up the other side of the ditch, hit the fence, bounced back down and up the other side, hit a telephone pole. My mechanic dived under the cowl. I cut to the left, swung down through the ditch, bounced off the fence again, and came back heading for another telephone pole. Back under the cowl went the mechanic. Down in the ditch I went again, careened off the fence, and here came the third pole. I finally wrestled the car back onto the road between poles, but I had bent an axle and twisted it off. So at the 1920 race, when Mulford overshot Hornbeak Turn, he continued east on Larkin Avenue. And De Palma yelled out, "Looks like Mulford's going downtown for lunch." That makes me wonder if these guys put a little too much faith in the four-wheel braking at that point. So De Palma had won 2 prior races, would win the 20 race, driving an 8-cylinder Ballot. For whatever reason, the race had been shortened to 250 miles at that point. So he's a 3-time winner and the only multiple winner of the races. Now, at this point, racing is done. This type of racing is done. The cars are getting too fast. The roads were still crappy. It was dangerous. And something else had happened. In the mid-teens, the Indianapolis racetrack is built. So for the first time, there is oval track closed racing. Safer for the drivers, probably more fun and better view for the spectators. And so this road racing was going to fade into history in favor of closed track racing. But we're going to try it again in 1933. Now, what's going on in the country in 33? What's going on in Chicago in 33? Do you see the thought process here? A lot of Elgin suffering from depression, same as everybody else. And I can see a couple guys getting together over a beer going, remember when 50,000 people brought money to Elgin? We ought to do that again. So if we start up the road races, this will be a bonanza for Elgin. Spoiler, it lost money. But we're going to race in Elgin again. And so here's the advertising. It's going to be spectacular. It's going to be the Saturday in August again. There's a copy of the program. Little different racing this time. The 33 race was going to be 2 races. Both were 203-mile events. One was for stock cars, and 15 would sign up. I'll come back and talk about that in a minute. The other race was for, I guess I'll talk about here. One was for 15 stock cars. The entries were American production cars with displacement of 231 cubic inches, and almost all were brand new Fords. Now, unless you follow the history of Ford, you won't be aware of this. The Model A goes out of production in 1931. 1932 is kind of a Band-Aid year for Ford. He's making kind of a mishmash of car because he's redesigning the car. So in 33, he's rolling out a V8 engine. He'd given up on the 4 cylinders that the Model A's were. Chevrolet was kicking his butt with a 6-cylinder. So he jumps all the way to an 8. And this is the car that's on the showroom floor in 33. Henry Ford wants to win Elgin because he wants that as a marketing tool. So he sends 10 complete cars and racing teams to Elgin. There's only 15 cars in the race. So 10 Fords, 3 Chevys, a Plymouth, and a Dodge. He's bound and determined to win Elgin, the stock car race. The other race was for what they called heavy cars or Indy-style cars. So these were the cars that now were designed for racing, not stocks. So we're lined up still 2 by 2, although it looks like the road is paved by now on Larkin Avenue. So there's another shot of a couple of them coming around Hornbeak Turn. By this time, Barney Oldfield and Eddie Rickenbacker are old guys. So Barney's the starter and Eddie's the referee. They were given ceremonial jobs. And the free-for-all or the heavy race was won by Phil Schaefer in a Buick Special. Now that's starting to look a little bit like an Indy race car, isn't it? And doesn't that look a little better than they were, 23 years before? So the Buick Special was capable of speeds of 150 miles an hour. It traveled at 115 past the grandstand. I think this is still an unsafe concept, people. The car was valued at $10,000 and it was demolished in a crash at Indy 2 years later. But that's the car that won the heavy race. So here's a look from an airplane down at Graveyard Bend. This is where Coombs meets Route 20. What's interesting about this picture is you see those buildings in the front. That's a house and that's a gas station, a Standard Oil station. Now, a couple of years ago, we had a very elderly gentleman come to the museum and do a program. He was an 8-year-old boy at the time of the 33 race. He lived in that house. His father owned the gas station. And he remembered helping his mother sell food to the fans. And when we saw him a couple of years ago, well into his 90s, he believed he could well be the last living person to have seen an Elgin road race. And he died a couple of years ago. Now that race featured an Elgin car, the Piston Pin Special. The Elgin Piston Pin Company sold auto parts to all the major manufacturers. And so they thought that they would design and race their own car. And there it is. It didn't win, but it raced. And there's the car going over Aviation Hill, still airborne, 95 miles an hour. Now, back to the stock car race. How did Henry Ford do? We may never know. Oop. Well, you probably can't read this, so I'll tell you the finish. First place Ford, second place Ford, third place Ford, fourth place Ford, fifth place Ford, sixth place Ford, seventh place Ford. Then a Plymouth sneaks in. So Henry got his wish. Now the driver of the winning Ford is Fred Frame. I also noticed he finished second in the heavy race. So Fred Frame had a good day. Now Fred Frame was driving this car. This car was at our car show last Sunday. This is the actual car that won their 33 race. It lives in Wisconsin, and it periodically comes and visits us for the car show. Isn't that a cool piece of history? The actual car. After the race, it toured the country as a promotional piece. Ford wanted to get his mileage out of winning the Elgin race. So a look back at the winners down through the years. You can see their names. More importantly, you can see how the miles per hours grew through the years, only taking that one step back in 1919 when it fell back a few miles per hour. As I said, the 33 race lost money, so no one wanted to try it again, and that ends road racing in Elgin. De Palma was the most successful. He won 3 times. It was said he kept himself and his cars in immaculate condition. And at the age of 50, he returned to compete at the races one more time in the 33 race. Now, a couple of side stories under the title of Boys Will Be Boys. If we're going to be racing cars, what are the boys going to be racing? Soapbox or push cars. So there's a 1910 car with a couple of boys. Here's one for the Pushmobile races in 1933. Nobody's wearing a helmet, of course, or anything that we would make our kids do today. Here they're racing downhill. Some of the cars weighed over 300 pounds. It would go 20 miles an hour. And here's a 1950s era slide, and that fellow in the front is wearing a helmet. That's the National Street Hill. So think about that. If you're starting at the top of the hill, headed towards the watch factory in the river, those cars probably were making some speed by then. So do we still remember the Elgin races? Well, we do. We have a reenactment every year in August. It's put on by the Model T Club, of Fox Valley Model T Club. They get their old cars. They put them at the nursing home that's there on Larkin Avenue, the Adventera, am I saying that right? They take over their parking lot. They have a car show on a Saturday or Sunday for a few hours. And somewhere around 3 o'clock, they fire up the old cars and they do one parade lap around the race course. Is that Maury in the first car? Is that Maury? Okay. Now they do it all wrong because they run the race lap backwards because they want to make right turns. So, which I think we can understand. There's a couple monuments marking the race. That stone, that rock, that's in the grounds there next to Larkin Avenue and the Larkin High School property. Little closer look. It has a descriptive plate mounted on it. And there's a little closer look of the plate. And it just lists the winners and talks about the fact that the race was run. The state of Illinois put up a commemorative signboard. We have 5 historical markers in Elgin. This is the most recent one installed, and it was done in 2010. This is on Larkin Avenue out by what used to be called the Triumph Bank. It is another bank. It's a different bank now, but out by the by Nick. Yeah. Those restaurants out there. If you look, it's on the south side of Route 20. Do not pull over on Route 20 to read this. Pull into the parking lot by the bank. You can get out of your car. You can read that. That's the state of Illinois verbiage. Talks about a lot of the things we talked about today. Those 5 people in the picture were still alive in 2010, and it all had seen the 33 race. So that's why they're there at the dedication. Now, the museum has extra information on the back side of that board. We've augmented that information with information about the race. That's just the verbiage on the race. And there's another look at that trophy we have that's in the display case back there. I mentioned earlier that we raised the money and bought it at auction. I really want the big national trophy that it lives in Cleveland in a private collection. That collector does collect a lot of race-related things. He's loaned it to us a couple of times. We've had it here. I've seen it. We at the museum believe it should be here. He does not see it that way, but he's loaned it to us. So I'm probably running out of time. A quick look around the course. We still remember Ralph Mulford. Anybody here live on Mulford Drive? Anybody here know where Mulford Drive is? So we're by Lord's Park. Yeah. So named after Ralph. But just some looks at the different tracks different streets as we go around the track then and now. The gas station's gone from that aerial photo. Well, we'll close with another look at smiling Ralph Mulford and his mechanic. A little more on Mulford. He competed in 10 Indy races, finishing 6th or better each time. He won over $14,000 in prize money. He drove for Duesenberg, Knox, Mercedes, Peugeot, and Frontenac. And this is his quote in 1960. I'm talking about Elgin. I never competed in a race where better sportsmanship was displayed. Every driver was more than willing to give a faster car the right of way, and others risked their lives by giving way in order to leave a clear track. The mechanics were on the job all the time and acted as our eyes for the drivers. And that, my friends, is the end of road racing. Thank you.
The races was a auto, an engine, Miller, Duesenberg engine. Harry Miller, very famous, very, very famous automotive man. And Al mentioned my wife, Linda Rock, who was planning on being here. Harry Miller, Linda Rock's great uncle.
Oh.
So we know a whole lot about Miller. But that was kind of cheap.
Yeah.
So Jeff, you should explain the Miller engine in case of
Well,
and Jeff just told me that when he went to the Indianapolis Museum, they walked in and right past the entrance gate, there's a bust of Harry Miller. So Harry
Miller, for example, in 1926 to 27, 18 of the top 20 finishers had a Miller engine. I mean, he was an automotive genius and business failure. Couldn't do anything right business-wise, and Penny Offenhauser was one of the folks who bought him out, and Offenhauser is a name that many of these guys will remember that name, went on. I could bore you there about that. But
I'll take a question. I can't guarantee I'll answer it. I will make something up, but yeah. Yeah.
Wisconsin, you know where?
Yes, the Mecum Auto Auction people in Lake Geneva,
Oh, Lake Geneva.
he's the owner.
In Walworth.
In Walworth, actually. In fact, you want to talk about going up and getting it, George?
Dennis Roxworthy puts together the auto show for the History Museum. And we were just kicking around the idea of something to like spur on the show. And I said, let's go get the 33 Ford that lives up in Walworth. And so I contacted Mecum through Jeff. I contacted Mecum. They said, yeah, sure, come and get it. We had a buddy who was able to trailer the car for us, and we got it down here. And the best experience of my life was touring Mecum's places up in Walworth. And there was, I got a picture of a Miller motorcycle from, I think it was from 1899. So it's the same Miller that Jeff was just talking about. So that guy sort of invented racing.
I will add this. Perry was a tool and die guy in Milwaukee, and he was interested in doing things that against his knowledge of women. And he figured out how to put an engine onto a boat. And as he's telling these guys at their station, there's a guy 3 or 4 places down who's doing the E.F. Hutton routine, writing down all this stuff. And he patented all the very ideas. And slash with Evan Root. So as I mentioned, Harry was a terrible business person. And one last thing, the 1913 motorcycle race they had in Elgin, that was the first sanctioned motorcycle race in the United States. And we had, in 2013, had a centennial event because of that.
So anything else?
Yeah. So the 2013 reenactment, I remember I was down here for the reenactment in downtown Elgin, and I remember driving home, and all the bikes had driven out through the race course and ran the race course and come back. And so as I was driving home, all the motorcycles were coming back to downtown Elgin. So I do have one more thing. I've got a picture here of my dad in the number 14 car in 1933, and my dad was working for
The piston pin car.
the piston pin company owned by the Skolk family.
Yeah.
And he was senior in high school, and he told me that Mr. Skolk had come down to the machine shop and say, "Come on, Roll, we're taking the car." And so my dad got to drive drove the number 14 car. Of course, not in a race.
Right. All right. Well, thank you all for coming. I hope you had a good time.